We're so glad that you've joined us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Our hope is that you're both encouraged and challenged in your relationship with Jesus. Be blessed as you listen to this week's message.
All right, this morning we are starting a brand new series called The Struggle is Real. And really the focus of this series is that we all kind of understand we're all on the same page. We all struggle. We are all tempted. We all wrestle with our flesh. And even today, as we're going to look at the story of Jacob today, that sometimes we wrestle with God, but the struggle that we all face is common to us. And I just wanted to hopefully give you some hope today, hopefully let you understand this. Many times you can be wrestling with something, dealing with something, and you feel like I'm the only one who deals with this. I'm the only one who thinks this way, who has this hang up, who has this struggle. And the truth is, we all have struggles. We all wrestle with things. And I just want you to be encouraged today, not that we celebrate our sinfulness or our struggles, but we can celebrate the God who understands that we all do, and he's there for us all in the middle of whatever it is that you struggle with. So actually, a few years ago, I started doing turkeys for Thanksgiving a few years ago, and really I discovered that I love it. I do it for our family. I started doing it in our student ministry, and eventually both my father and mother-in-law and my parents were asking me for Thanksgiving to make the turkeys. I came up with a pretty killer recipe that kind of stole from Emerald and a couple other places and put something together. So one day I was at a grocery store, and I'm getting all of these ingredients to get this turkey. And I don't know if you're like this, but I have a knack, and it may be a spiritual gift because I'm so good at it, at finding the longest and slowest possible line in the grocery store. Anybody else have this problem? Like, I will go to the one that seems that it is the best one, but that person's writing a check, or like that person's like cashing a bail bond, or like that person's like doesn't know how to use a debit card reader, or that person has like a magazine of coupons that they're trying to go through. I always find the wrong line. Well, this day I happened to find the worst possible line to get behind, and I'm in a hurry. Got to put that turkey in the oven. And I'm in this line, and I remember finding the wrong ones, and I guess part of my problem is a little self-imposed, but I also have this pride thing where I will get in the line, and I won't move to the other one. I'll be like, I chose this line, I'm committing to this line, and I will stay in that dumb line and then, lose my patience. But I'm in this line, and sure enough, somebody's going through this book of coupons to save 30 cents on a thing of toothpaste, and I'm like, lady, I got this turkey here. Do you not understand? This is important. And I'm getting frustrated, but I think I'm doing a good job of hiding it. However, I am not. I'm not doing a very good job of hiding it, and you can usually see how I'm feeling on my face, and I glance up at the clerk, and he's looking at me, and he keeps looking at me, and I'm like trying to keep a straight face, trying to be cool, and finally I get up to the line, and he says, "You're pretty annoyed, huh?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not. Not annoyed." He's like, "Yeah, bro, I can see you in line." He's like, "You look pretty annoyed." I'm like, "Leave it alone. You don't know anything about me. You don't know that I'm totally fine right now." And we go back and forth for a second, and I'm like, "Why am I arguing with this dude? Like, you have no right to speak this into my life." And then after I leave, I realize it was actually God speaking that to me, that you wear it on your face, and you need to be a witness everywhere that you go. And I say that just to say that I struggle with things, and one of them is impatience. I like to have things my way and my time. And, I think we all have felt something similar, that we struggle in some sense. And I want to read to you a verse that Paul actually is kind of giving hope to people who struggle in some sense. Now, when we talk about struggle today, there's really two categories of struggle. There's situational struggle, which may be something like poverty or someone needs to be healed, something that can happen to you. And then there's sinful struggle. And that struggle that you give into your flesh, you give into a temptation of our enemy, Satan. And there's just kind of different types of struggles. So we're going to do our best to kind of separate them today. And I'm going to address one at the end. But Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians 10. He says this, addresses pride right off the bat. "If you think that you're standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. So what Paul is saying here is he's saying that, listen, first of all, don't think that you're too good and you don't struggle. Don't be sitting in your chair and say, that ain't me, I don't struggle. I don't have the same struggles as somebody else. I think we all have a tendency to look across the room, to look at different people, even in church, and say, they're struggling more than I am. They smell different than I do. They look different than I do. I'm a mature believer. I don't struggle like they struggle. And the truth is, your pride is just as disgusting to God as whatever they did before they came in the doors. All of us struggle on some level, and it's all going to be different. And we all have different struggles. Some of us share the same ones. But Paul is warning us and saying, be careful. If you think you're standing strong, be careful. Last Saturday, we went play with a couple of guys. We went play foot golf. Foot golf is, I've never done it before. I was interested in it, but what it basically is it's the rules of golf, but instead of hitting with a golf club and a golf ball, you kick a soccer ball, and there are large, like 24-inch holes in the golf course, and you try to kick it in. And I go into this thinking like, okay, I'm not that great at golf, but I know how it works. I can kick a soccer ball. I'm going to be amazing at this. I'm going to be beast. I'm even like the day before, I'm like bragging to somebody in the church. I'm like, I'm going to be pretty good at this. I'm pretty sure. So, and she said something along the lines of like, oh, you're fairly confident in yourself, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, it's soccer. Well, how bad could it be? I get out there, and the first kick, I'm like, I kicked this ball, and I may as well have kicked an 8-pound medicine ball, because this thing, I felt like I broke my foot off on the first kick. And then like the rest of the day, I'm not kidding you, I'm limping all day from kicking this dumb soccer ball. One time I kicked the ball straight up in the air, and I don't know if it's the wind or what, or the spin, but that thing comes back, it lands, and it rolls behind where I was originally. And I'm like, I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. And I was humbled. Like, I just was like, I thought I was going to be a beast at this. I thought I was going to do great. And I was humbled in this moment. And I don't know if it was necessarily God trying to put me in my place, but I definitely know that I have a tendency to separate my struggle from other people's. And I have a tendency to think, I don't deal with things like they deal with things. And I'm actually quite strong. And I'm past that. And I think that Paul is warning us all that it's very dangerous to be in a place like that. We all struggle, and we've all got to get in a place where we are honest about our struggles. Can I help you today and make myself look a little bit worse just for a moment? There's things that you probably deal with that you're like, no, there's no way my pastor would deal with this. Okay, if you deal with road rage, let me see your hand. Have you ever had the urge to want to tell somebody on the road that they were number one as you were passing them up? I have too. I've struggled with that too. I've never done it. I've never flipped anybody the bird while I'm driving, but I have had the urge and the fantasy thought, what if I do like in the movies and just like sideswipe this car a little bit, and I would never do it, but sometimes I think and I get frustrated and I'm like, who let these people on the road? Where did you get your license? You Walmart? Sometimes I can get frustrated. How many of you have ever yelled at your kids? I have too. I've done that too. The struggle is real. I've faced that too. How many of you have ever had a moment where you gave into lust, either after a person or a thing that you shouldn't have? I have. I've done that. How many of you have ever used a moment to insult your spouse when you should have kept your mouth shut? I have. I've done that. All of you holy people, y'all don't deal with this stuff, but I have dealt with things. I've struggled. We all struggle. And you've got to come to a place where you say, I need to be honest with God, because that's the only way that real relationship happens. And then whenever somebody else is struggling, I can't make them feel like they're some weirdo because I don't deal with stuff. We're called to help each other along. And if you're better than everybody else, nobody can touch you. You're not helping anybody by letting everybody know how perfect you are. Now, there's obviously a standard of righteousness, and we encourage each other towards that. But I think there needs to be an authenticity about your struggle, about where you are. I love that it says that even when you struggle, he says, look, your temptations are no different than what everybody else feels. Everybody deals with kind of the same stuff. But then he says this in verse 13, he says, but God is faithful. He's not saying God is faithful so that you can rub it in and be like, you're nothing like me, even though we aren't anything like him. He's saying God is faithful because when you struggle, he wants to help you. He wants to, as it says at the end of verse 13, he wants to give you a way out. He wants to help you with that struggle. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in the middle of a struggle, a temptation, and God has spoken clearly to me, here's your way out. Multiple times. I think this happened this week, that I'm like texting somebody, and I have the gift of insult. If nobody else has this gift, it's me. I could let somebody have it and make somebody feel stupid. And I'm texting something, and like, I'm about to make fun of this guy or say something that would probably make him feel bad, but it was going to be a joke, right? It's not a big deal. And I felt the Spirit of God say, don't send it. Don't do that. It's not gonna give life. It's not gonna bring hope to anybody. You're doing this for a cheap laugh. So I stopped, and I didn't do it. And there's multiple times in my life when I am tempted, when I struggle, and the Lord is always faithful to give us a way out. What does that look like for you? It may be a phone call at the right time. It could be something as simple as when you're struggling with the area of lust, or you are struggling with some other temptation, that you get a text at the right time from somebody that you're accountable to, or you get a call from that person. It could be that somebody calls you and speaks life and tells you how great you are whenever you are considering taking your life. See, God always has a way out of our struggle, of our temptation. He wants to help you. Yeah, we all struggle, but you don't have to struggle alone. God is faithful, and he's in it with you. He's in that struggle with you. He always gives you a way out. I was showing Brooklyn how to climb our tree this week, and she's 8 years old, and I think at this time I was climbing trees too, and she's been wanting to climb it, and she just couldn't really get past the first branches, so we kind of were like, I think it might be a little bit too soon for you. But this week, she had just like energy and this bravery all of a sudden that came over, and she's like, I think I could climb it. And it's a tall magnolia tree, probably about as high as the ceiling in here, and she's climbing this tree. She starts climbing it, and I climb all the way up to the top to kind of show her how it's done, and she climbs all the way up this tree with me, all the way up to the top, and then she comes all the way back down, and as she's coming down, I'm helping her, and I never lent her a hand except for that one time that she kind of slipped. Sorry, babe, forgot to tell her about that part. But I would tell her, like, baby, if you're stepping down, try to put your foot on that branch right there. You see the big one? Put your foot on that one. And then grab this other branch with your left hand, and then you can kind of twist around this one and put your left foot down on this other branch. So I'm directing her and I'm guiding her this whole time, and she does this whole tree by herself without me touching. I never touch her. I never lent her a hand. And she ends up doing this 3 or 4 more times, and then eventually Brooke comes out, and Brooke's watching her do this, and Brooke is like, oh my gosh, what are you doing letting her climb this tree? I'm like, babe, she wanted to climb it. Like if she wants to climb the tree, in order for her to accomplish it, I've got to let her do it, right? And she's like, if she dies, it's on you. That is what she said. And I mentioned that to her yesterday, and she said, it's still true. We'll hold you responsible if our daughter falls out of the tree. But I remember thinking about it, like as she's coming down, it was difficult for her. She's a lot smaller than me. She's not as confident. But as she was coming down, I was watching her every step. And I was guiding her, and I was saying, this is going to be safest if you do this. Put your foot here. Put your hand here. And I was guiding her down, and she did it without me actually doing it for her. And I believe that's kind of what God does in your life as you are climbing in life, as you are wrestling and struggling. God is saying, I'm right here with you. Listen to my voice. I'm going to give you the next step. I'm going to let you come down safely without being harmed. I'm not going to let you fall to your death. You're going to be okay because I'm right here. But part of the struggle of life, part of becoming like Jesus, is that God doesn't hold your hand all the way through. It's a process the Bible calls sanctification, that we become more and more like Christ. There is a wrestling that is natural and that is necessary for us to become more like Jesus. I want to look at a story today. In Genesis 32, there's a man named Jacob who is known as one of the fathers of our faith, fathers of the Jewish faith, faith, and because of that, because it's also our faith. And so this guy, Jacob, let me just kind of set up where he's at. He's running for his life, basically. And as he's running for his life, he ends up doing something to kind of protect himself, because he's worked for over 14 years for his father-in-law now, he's worked for 2 daughters to become his wife. And he kind of swindles him. And, so Jacob is working, and he finally pays off his debt. And he's on his way running away from him. But he finds out that his brother, who he offended when he was younger, is now coming to meet him with 400 soldiers. So Jacob's freaking out. He's upset about this. And let's pick up in verse 22. It says, during the night, Jacob got up. He took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and he crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob is kind of, in this moment, he is wallowing in self-pity. He is in the middle of the biggest struggle in his life. Behind him, he's running away. He's running from his past, and before him, there's certain death. And that's what he feels. So in this moment, he's basically giving up. The promise that God gave Abraham that his descendants would be as many as the sand on the seashore and the stars in the sky, God gave that same promise to Jacob. And Jacob's already got the beginnings of that. He's got a family. He's got these kids. And Jacob ends up giving his promise up, sending his promise over the river because he can't deal. The struggle's too real for him. He can't deal in this moment. He's willing to give up everything that's been promised to him because of his fear, because he's so concerned about what's going to happen to him next. In verse 24, it says that this left Jacob all alone in the camp. A man came and wrestled with him until dawn began to break. And when the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and men and have won. Please tell me your name, Jacob said. Why do you want to know my name? The man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. And Jacob named the place Peniel, which means the face of God. For he said, I have seen God face to face, and my life has been spared. Verse 31, the sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he left limping because of the injury to his hip. And I think Jacob is struggling, and his struggle is beginning to overtake him, because the first thing Jacob does is he sends everything that brings him comfort, everything that could possibly speak encouragement in life, he sends all of that away. And he's in this moment, and he's feeling sorry for himself, and he's hating on his life, and why in the world would this happen to me? He's got all these concerns, and all of a sudden, God comes to him in that moment. God comes to him at the lowest moment in his life. Jacob is full of fear. He's worried. He's concerned about the future. He's given up on God and his promise. And all of a sudden, God comes and meets him there. I think the worst thing you can do when you're struggling is be alone, is get out of fellowship and relationship with people and try to deal with that on your own. But as Paul said, God is faithful, and our struggle is never devoid of God's presence. You're never alone. You never struggle alone. And really, there's kind of 3 things I want to pull out of this story today. And the first one is that when God wrestles you, he's attempting to rescue you. When God comes to wrestle you, he's attempting to rescue you. God comes to Jacob, and he's basically trying to slap him around and be like, what are you doing? I've given you a promise. I've given you a hope and a future, and you're going to give up? He understood, and he saw where Jacob was, and he decided he's going to come in, and he's going to prove to Jacob who he is. I think the wrenching out of the socket, his hip being wrenched out of his socket thing, was a display of God's power so that he could reinstate confidence in Jacob, confidence in his God, trust in his God, that he can be trusted. I remember a few years ago, being a student pastor, you've always got some students who are going to try to challenge your authority and challenge the way that you do ministry. And we had this one kid who really had a rough upbringing. He was a really tough kid. He was bigger than me. And he had just drugs in his background, no father figure. So he'd take it out on me all the time. He would always challenge us. I'd be preaching, and he would say stuff and cut up or whatever. And yeah, I didn't know what to do about it, because I actually honestly thought he could probably whoop my butt if he needed to. But I was just thinking, how do I handle this guy? Lord, give me wisdom. And I don't know if it was all God or not, but one night I finally got the answer. We had a guy's sleepover at someone's house. And all the guys start to wrestle. And, guys like to wrestle at these events. And this big guy, he calls me out and he says, Josh, I want to wrestle you. And first of all, like a chill goes through my body. I'm like, did somebody lower the AC? What's going on up in this house? All of a sudden, I'm like, I don't know if I can handle this dude. He's huge, But the good thing was, I grew up in a family with 2 boys and a dad who kind of would wrestle with us every night. And we grew up fighting, but good, healthy fighting. But I was strong. I still, if y'all want to wrestle later, y'all, I still got it. But this dude calls me out and he challenges me to this wrestle. And I'm like, all right, here we go. We're going to see what happens. And in about 2 minutes, I had him pinned down and he could not move at all. And he's begging mercy because he hadn't had the same experience I had. You know what happened after that? After that, every single time I saw him, he'd be like, hey, Mr. Josh, how you doing? Hey, Pastor Josh, it's good to see you, man. I still see him today, and he's like, Josh, come give me a hug, man. Come give me a hug. And I'm like, don't squeeze the life out of me, bro. I know you're trying to get me back. But it was amazing how in that moment, all of a sudden I gained his respect because I outpowered him. I overpowered him. God comes to Jacob in this moment. Jacob had lost all confidence in God's promise. And God comes and he says, well, I guess I have to overpower you once again so that you can see who I was, so that you can have confidence in me once again. I think it's interesting. In verse 26, Jacob, this guy ends up saying, hey, let me go. And Jacob's kind of like, what are you talking about? Where are you going to go? And this guy says, I've got to go because the dawn is breaking. If you're in the middle of a struggle right now, it's your night. But God wrestles us and challenges us so that we can trust him in the night. Because if you trust him in the night, your dawn is coming. Your morning is on the way. But you've got to learn to trust and give up yourself to God in the night, or you can live in night all your life. But the moment that you give over your strength and your life to God in that moment and you say, I can't do it, I can't wrestle on my own, the moment you release all of your attempts and tries to fix your own life, the morning is on the way. I believe that the struggle is part of the process. You've got to struggle, and God struggles with us. He'll wrestle us sometimes so that we can learn once again who he is and his mercy and his power in our life. The second thing that I saw in the story was that in between the promise and the blessing is the struggle. In between the promise that Jacob had and the blessing he was walking into was the struggle. Do you know what happened whenever Jacob gets to his brother Esau? He gets out there and he's got these 400 men and he's scared to death, and he finally meets his brother, and his brother takes off running towards him and he gives him a hug. He embraces him and he says, brother, it's good to see you. And Jacob's like, what are you talking about? Last time I saw you, I stole your birthright, man. I stole everything that mattered to you. And his brother wanted to kill him. And all of a sudden, God restored this relationship. Oftentimes, while we struggle and we see no hope, God is working behind the scenes. And God had been working on Esau this whole time, and Jacob didn't know it. Jacob had to finally get to a place where he said, you know what? I'm just going to trust, release myself into your hands, God. And God was faithful, and this relationship was even restored. In between the promise and the blessing is a struggle. And I think if you're going to grow at all, your relationship with God, it's got to have some struggle. You've got to have some struggle. There was a really cool fort that we went to a few weeks ago with our family. We went to Pensacola, Florida, and there's a fort out there called Fort Pickens. And we went out there, and this fort was kind of set up on the coast, watching an inlet into a bay that they would guard from pirates coming in or enemy ships coming in, and they had these cannons that could fire 8 miles, they said. It was incredible. And they had this beautiful place, and you go out there now, and it's all ruins, and it's such a cool tourist attraction. And we're out there and we're enjoying the view, and it's like, man, you can see the ocean out there. It's such a cool experience. But I remember thinking while I'm up there looking out at this view, wow, this is beautiful. And I remember thinking at the same time, there was a time in our history where blood was shed on this land, where what I'm looking at today and the fact that I get to come out here and enjoy this view, it cost people their lives. It cost somebody something. It's not free for me to go there, even though there's free admission. It costs somebody to get in there. I believe that what we miss so many times, we look at other people and we see somebody with a blessed life and somebody who seems to have everything going for them. And sometimes we can be bitter and why don't I have a life like theirs? And I think sometimes we just haven't been through the struggle yet. And you see somebody who has a blessed life, I guarantee you they've also been through struggle. They've also been through difficulty. There's people in this room that they seem like rocks. They seem solid. They seem like, man, that's the kind of person I want to be like. I guarantee you that they're the way they are today because of the struggle they've been through. The struggle is part of the process. We've got to experience struggle and struggle with things in life. You've got to wrestle with sin. You've got to overcome sin. That's all part of becoming like Christ. I love this in verse 28. God ends up asking him, what's your name? And Jacob says, my name's Jacob. You know what Jacob means? It means heel grabber, supplanter, deceiver. This is who he was. And God looks at him after this struggle and he says, no longer will that be your name. Instead, now your name will be Israel, which has a meaning that means basically God is victorious, God wins. God won in this struggle, and that became his identity. That became his identity. I think that we often pull our identities from our struggle. You will. You're going to pull your life, and you're going to pull your value. You're going to pull everything about you. You're going to pull your identity from the things that you struggle with. And really, that's the last thing that I wanted to pull out of this, is that either the struggle owns you or Jesus owns you. How many of you have struggled with something for so long and you kind of can feel, this feels like this is who I am. This is who I've become. I've become this struggle and I can't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I can't see a way out of this, and you've let the struggle own you. But as God comes and he wrestles Jacob in this moment, God is saying, look, when you struggle with me, I'm going to help. I'm going to help you to lay those things down, to kill those things, so that now you can have a new name, a new identity. There's a term from YouTube videos, owned, and I don't know if you've heard of this word or not, but this really kind of illustrates it. In a YouTube video, if something like this happens and somebody has an accident, somebody gets wrecks or has something happen to them, it is said that they got owned. It is said that they were owned in that moment. And I think that we have in our life, you are struggling constantly, and the struggle that you face can either own you, and you can be walking around with the bruises and the shame and the filth that you can't seem to get out and you don't want to let anybody know about. You can let that struggle own you, or you can let the identity that God wants to give you own you. Do you know what Jacob, I love this, that Jacob ends up talking, he names this place the face of God. After he wrestles with God, he names it the face of God. I think it's really good that Jacob would look back at this place and remember that he saw God, not fought God. Because he fought God. This is the majority of the time that he spends there. But all of a sudden, the revelation that he gets that this was God I'm fighting with, I'm struggling with, he remembered the moment and the intimacy with God, that he was wrestling, that he was fighting with God, and he says, I saw the face of God. I was privileged not to die. That must mean he has a meaning for me, a purpose for me. Jacob names this place after this struggle, the face of God. I think the experience is the prize, not the fight. The fight is not the prize. The experience with God is the prize. And I say that to say that on the struggle that is sin in our life, oftentimes we swing the opposite way, and instead of not admitting that we have struggle, many of us as Christians, the younger generation coming up, celebrates our mishaps and our sins so much that it almost becomes a point of praise. Yeah, just deal with this. I just struggle. It's just, struggle is real, man. Just can't let this thing go. Just being real, though, just being honest. I think we need to be careful with that, because anything that is a sin struggle that never gets put to death is really just a compromise. There needs to be something in your life that takes the place of that sin. That sin in your life needs to die eventually. Now, you may struggle all your life, but I think if you continually are struggling with that same sin again and again and again, and for the span of your life, you never have victory in that area, you've never taken that thing to the cross. You've never nailed that thing to the cross. You've never let Jesus have that part of you. And I think the struggles should change in our life. I'm not going to deal with this any longer. I may pick up a new one. God may reveal something different about me that he's going to wrestle me for. But it's not a point of celebration for us to celebrate our sin. The struggle is not the prize. We don't brag about the struggle. We brag about the God who gets us through the struggle. I read a really interesting article about a guy, Eric Weinenmayer. He's a climber who climbed Everest. He climbed the 7 tallest peaks in the world, and he's blind. He's blind. He couldn't climb this without anybody's help. He needed help. And he gets up to the top of Everest, and he says this about his experience on Everest. He says, you know, the view from the top of Everest wasn't all that great. The hugs at the summit made it worthwhile. And I think what this man says about the experience, the struggle that he faced, I think I read an article that said that 1/3 of all people who attempt to climb Everest die. It's an incredible struggle. It's a difficult thing to do. And he climbs this mountain with his friends, and he gets to the top, and he says, it's not about the mountain. It's not about the view. It's not about this next mountain peak that I get to, because there are peaks in our life, and you've got a great view, but there's going to be a valley coming. There can't be mountains without valleys, and there can't be valleys without mountains. You're going to be up and down all your life. There's going to be a struggle. There's going to be a victory. There's going to be a struggle. There's going to be a victory. And he says it's not about the climb. It's about the experience with the people that helped me to do it. And I think that that's what God wants us to understand today through the story of Jacob, that it's not about the fact that you finally got victory and you were restored with your brother Esau and you didn't die and you were able to escape from your past. It's not even about any of that. It's about the struggle with God, because in the struggle is where intimacy with God is discovered. When you are that close to God that he can touch your hip and leave a mark on you. That's the goal, that we are intimate with God. He wants to be close to you. He wants to be with you in the struggle. You're not meant to face it on your own, so don't. And Jesus took that fight so that we could rest, so that we can live in victory. Jesus struggled ultimately with God the Father in the garden. He prayed and he struggled with God. Is there any other way? Is there something else we can do? He felt our pain. He felt our struggle, and he went to the cross for you. He fought the ultimate struggle so that your struggle wouldn't be in your own strength. He's with you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel. If you would like to support the ministry of Anchor Chapel, you can easily do so by visiting our website, anchorchapel.com. Also, follow us on social media at Anchor Chapel. We'll see you next week. God bless.